This is Ali John Chaudhry, psychotherapist, and I'm here today with Fern Schumer Chapman. And of course, we have a very, very important episode. Today, we're going to be talking about why it is that at certain points in our lives, we get more concerned with sibling estrangement. And the question we're asking here is it possible that certain life stages can cause us to think more and ruminate about such situations? So, in this particular episode, we're going to explore how certain life stages can be conducive to making us more susceptible to sibling estrangement questions. So, today we will be exploring some of Erikson's theories of development in particular, and his eight-stage theory of psychosocial development is a blend of personal experiences, clinical observations, and interdisciplinary studies in psychology, psychoanalysis, anthropology, and sociology. Now, we're not going to be getting into any of that very deeply, but we're going to be, of course, discussing this in particular to sibling estrangement, because there are particular aspects of his theory that are very key to us and members of our community. So, Fern, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. It's great to be with you. This concept and this idea actually was rooted in my analyzing who has approached me over the last months and years for help. And consistently, I find the people who need me are largely women, and they typically are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that shed light on this idea that there is something that occurs developmentally at those life stages that forces or inspires people to look at themselves and where they are in their lives and in their sibling relationships.
You're absolutely right. I find that what happens, especially in our community, is that there's that particular demography, 50s, 60s, and 70s, that seems to be very strong, right? When it comes to the people that tend to be concerned about sibling estrangement, right? And, we're very busy, right, in our generativity stage, according to Erikson, when it comes to, of course, being very outwardly productive, busy when it comes to, say, raising kids, mentoring other people, working in a career, whatever it is that creates a sense of purpose, right? We get very busy with that, and nurturing our relationships and being active in the community is also especially important here for us.
Yeah, I think people begin to think about their past as their children grow up and their careers wind down and their friends move away or become ill or die. And they start to long for connections with their siblings, even when they're estranged, and sometimes even reach out at this life stage, which can have positive and negative outcomes.
You're absolutely right. I think that's essential when it comes to, of course, a particular life development stage for us, right? And there's this need to reach out. There's this need to create a sense of purpose or meaning for ourselves, right? And I think that's really something that's especially key for us when it comes to people experiencing sibling estrangement. All of a sudden, these questions become very important, right? And Erikson talks about the flip side of the experience of generativity, and that's stagnation, right? And it's like hitting a wall of inertia, feeling unproductive and adrift, and it's more about getting the sense of being disconnected, right? And you'll hear often this particular theme in our community about this sense of disconnection that people experience with family or with siblings, especially, right? So a lot of times, I think that the sense of incompleteness that we experience overall, is very much related to his stage called stagnation.
Yeah, and I think that during the time that you're raising kids and building your career, you're so consumed with those things that you're not directing your thoughts to the shared history you might have had in your original family.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting to me is that a lot of the people who approach me suddenly start to identify patterns and characteristics in their sibling that they didn't see earlier in life. Maybe they become more educated about, say, for example, narcissism or post-traumatic stress disorder. And also related to that, post-traumatic stress disorder can sometimes rear its ugly head when people quiet down a little bit. In other words, when you slow down and don't have as much to distract you, the triggers can come out.
I absolutely agree. And it very much correlates, I think, with that sense of stagnation, right? That sense of not getting a sense of purpose, where everything kind of looks the same and such, where we're going through the motions and such. A lot of times we can get distracted with that. And what happens is that there's this result that comes out of that. And when you get to slow down, like you say, I think what happens is you get to kind of see what that can be potentially, right? And I think that a lot of times this has been the experience with a lot of people, is that maybe if the breakdowns happened a few years ago, with their siblings especially, right, it's only later on that somehow they may want to perhaps see like what's the reason behind that, right? And why is it that I'm experiencing this sense of incompleteness, and I'm having this gap in my life? Why is it that this is occurring, right? And this is where the introspection comes in, right, where there's a sense of wanting to gather a sense of meaning and such for us. And we have to be asking these questions, I think, because if we are not careful, then potentially we can fall into a stage of despair, right? Because I think that with integrity and such, that's the thing that happens after a given point in one of the stages of life. The integrity versus despair stage that Erikson talks about, is he mentions this, how it's so important for us to recognize how we're crafting the narrative of our lives through triumphs and tribulations, and that basically we want to see if we're okay in living with the situation, right? And that's the whole aspect of integrity versus despair, and we can, if we're not careful, we can fall into regret, right? And that's what a lot of people in our community are afraid of, I think, and are concerned with.
And I think that despair can sometimes push people to reach out to an estranged sibling, for example. And that can, like I said, have varying consequences. So maybe you have some sort of euphoric recall, or maybe you think this is the time to try again. And while that's great, you may reach out to that estranged sibling, but the reality is reconciliations often lapse back into estrangement, because the very issues that drove you apart reemerge and then drive you apart once again. And making matters worse, change is difficult, and many don't want to take responsibility or apologize for behaviors from the past. And as a result, things return to the baseline.
You're absolutely right. I think that a lot of times when we get to that stage where we're looking back and seeing in some ways, whether we can get some of what we experienced in the past, if it was positive before, can cause us to experience a sense of disappointment, right? And I think that it's really about creating meaning and authenticity. When you get into the integrity stage, it is about that, right? And how it is that these are very important questions, I think, with people in our sibling estrangement community, right? This idea of creating meaning and trying to see in some ways if we can repair, if that's at all possible. And if not, then of course, it comes back to that fundamental question, right? Which is, how do I live my life after having experienced sibling estrangement, And, a lot of times it is about limiting the negative effects of that, right? You get to a point, in your life where, you've created purpose for yourself. Maybe you've had some achievements, and such that you're proud of, but that there's some areas that, you may just have to learn to live with the idea that you may never get the result that you hope for in that sibling relationship, precisely because there's so many elements that contribute to that, that are not entirely in our control either. So how do we make peace with that? That's the question.
And actually, that's precisely the question that many clients approach me with, which is, how am I going to live with this? How can I quit ruminating and achieve some higher sense of well-being?
Exactly, exactly. Because the trade-off here, of course, is to experience disappointment, bitterness, let that eat us up inside, right? And if we experience that, then we're left with that question of despair, right? That particular notion that becomes the factor that defines us, and unfortunately, that weighs us down if we get into that type of experience. So it is really about creating a sense of being authentic with ourselves, having a sense of meaning and purpose, especially. I think that in general, when we look at what these stages show us, from Erikson, is the quest for meaning, the quest for purpose, the quest in being ourselves and making peace with those particular parts that, of course, can still be something that we wrestle and grasp with, in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think at this life stage that we're discussing, the clock starts ticking much more loudly in our ears and in our head. And so it drives us to either reconcile or make peace with the limited or non-relationship that we have with a sibling.
Exactly, right? And if it's not done outwardly, how do you do that inwardly, right? Because that's really the work that we do, right? It's about helping ourselves have more of a sense of inward peace with ourselves because we're the ones carrying this. We're the
Mhm.
ones concerned with this. We're the ones that basically are experiencing this and have to walk through life with this, this heavy burden, that nobody else sees, that nobody else understands in the outside world except us. And of course, more and more people that understand sibling estrangement, of course, but it's really an important factor for us to keep in mind when it comes to that, right? How is it that we can achieve more of a sense of inner peace with ourselves given this situation, of course?
And that reminds me of how some who have discovered, for example, that their sibling may have characteristics they can't tolerate, such as narcissism, they at this life stage say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So that factors in as well.
Yes, of course. There's so many different aspects to it when it comes to that, because the more you look at and study the situation of our estrangement, the more we understand like what are the types of factors that are influencing this? How did it get to this point? It's not just necessarily because of us, in that sense. Maybe we have had some reactions in some ways to it and such, but a lot of times it has to do, of course, with different types of factors, right? Personality changes in the person or having certain parts of their personality kind of really take over and really hijack the relationship in an unhealthy type of way. So, at this particular stage in life, it's like you want to be asking and kind of deconstructing, like, what's going on? Why has it gotten to that point? How can I reclaim myself? And those are really, really important questions in people in our community.
Mhm. And we've discussed how spouses or partners influence personality and character. And I think this is the point at which you sort of have to make peace with that as well. That this sibling is not necessarily the brother or sister you remember from your childhood because they've been exposed for years to somebody who's chewed on their ear about their involvement with the original family, for example. So that has a powerful influence as well. And you have to be very candid with yourself about what you can expect.
Exactly. To be brutally honest with ourselves in terms of how the relationship has evolved, what the sibling has brought into this relationship, or the lack thereof, and such. So it's really, really important to consider that, right? In terms of looking at the big picture, understanding it, and seeing how it is that we can foster, of course, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, and a sense of peace with ourselves, most importantly. So, Fern, this has been such a wonderful conversation to be had because I think that a lot of times, we focus on a lot of the past and a lot of the underlying reasons why, but also it's important to, of course, take our pulse and look at the status quo in terms of where we're at when we get to a particular life stage. So, this is such a great conversation that we're having, and I'm really glad that today's topic has been something that is, I think, very much connected to the realities that people in our sibling estrangement communities are going through.
I
So,
agree. And, unfortunately, we don't get the manual for life. And they don't give us the warning about 50s, 60s, and 70s.
right, exactly. But we're all getting there sooner or later, and it's great to be prepared to know what's coming up and the type of questions we end up having at that time in our lives, of course. So, Fern, we're almost out of time. Let's talk about resources. What would be your number one resource at this time?
Well, we've been talking about the people who approach us, and of course, the coaching is where I would direct some of our viewers and listeners. because I think that's the place to sort some of this out in one-on-one therapy or coaching so that you can begin to make peace.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's important that people realize they can reach out to us and, of course, gain some insight and some help when it comes to this. My number one resource at this time would be the Sibling Estrangement Support Group that we offer, of course, within the Sibling Estrangement Community Facebook page. If people are wondering where they can get information on that, if you look on screen, you'll be having a lot of information there. And you can look at the website and you can look at the Facebook page to get more information about that, or reach out to me as well when it comes to registering for the support group. So, Fern, thank you so much for doing this. This has been a wonderful episode, and I'm glad that we are able to shed light on this particular experience when it comes to life stages and sibling estrangement. So, thanks so much for doing this again, and I very much look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Oh, I'll look forward to the next one too.
All right, you take care. Thanks.